Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 32. We're in the beginning of Chodesh HaRachamim, a month when the 13 attributes of compassion, of mercy, of divine mercy, radiate every day of the month, and thus it's an opportune time to wish each other a blessed new year, to show an extra measure of love and unconditional Avos Yisrael to each other, and to do everything, acts of charity and everything in all the elements of Teira, Vedic, Milas, Chasadim, because there are times in the year when the channels are open, there are less layers, and this is one such period. The Rebbe would speak about it so often. And last week I reviewed some of the directives of the Rebbe regarding this month, and they obviously still apply, because it's the entire month, and every month, every day of the month, Ma'alim B'Kedesh, we increase in these acts, like in all good matters of Kedusha, that we never stagnate, and we don't just become mechanical, but we always are conscientious and pay attention to increase and deliberately add in all good things. It should be a blessed year for everyone, Begashmis and Beruchnis, all in good health, and a year of peace, and a year of Bracha v'Hatzlacha, Chassidus begashmis and beruchnis, like the Rebbe would say, beruchnis and begashmis, gashmis and beruchnis, kam yachad. With that, I'd like to begin, since we've been talking a little about Eretz Yisrael and about the events going on in the Middle East. So there's a video that I don't know if it recently released, but definitely very relevant, where the Rebbe says actually a chiddush, but we can apply it, Chassidus apply it to our lives. And I will quote that shortly, but first a few questions that we're following up previous episodes, and then we'll also address some new topics, ones that we promised to address and ones that we haven't promised but are timely. And thank God, the needs and the questions that people have are many and plentiful, and they keep coming in. And please don't hesitate. Any question is acceptable. Lo yahabaishan lamad. Every question is important, so please write them in. We are completely anonymous and confidential at meaningfullife.com/mylifelive. And if you need to reach me personally, because that's an email I cannot respond to, I don't know how to reach you, because it's, as I said, confidential. Personally, Simon, SIMON, at meaningfullife.com. So let me begin with the follow-up of some of the timely matters that have been on the table. Regarding episodes 29 and 30, where I spoke about Eretz Yisrael, about the question, of course, is Israel still the safest place on earth? Referring, of course, to the Rebbe's words. The Rebbe said a number of times to people who were asking him by dollars in writing and in the different situations whether they should in any way cancel their plans or be careful, or their children are in Israel during crisis, during times of conflict that were going on in Eretz Yisrael previously. So the question is, now it's 20, 22, 25 years later, would the Rebbe still say it's the safest place on earth? That was one question. Another, is there any situation which warrants fleeing our Jewish communities? Now we know pekuach nefesh, if you're in danger of life, is that enough reason to leave a community? Is there any situation where it would warrant to leave? And then I want to read a few more detailed questions in this same spirit and address that, and then, as I said, move on, hopefully, to the next topic. I think it may have been my daughter who asked the question about making Aliyah, and who mentioned Hakriya V'Akdusha. The question was in episode number 29 at about 18 minutes in. Your answer in episode number 30 seems to be that a Jew's role is to stay in Chutz La'aretz and have a positive and educational influence on both Jews and non-Jews, rather than make Aliyah. The point I have is this: the Rebbe left Europe when things got really not good there. The previous Rebbe and his entourage left Russia and then Europe after that and went to the US. They didn't stay until the Nazi thing would blow over. While Hafetza is important, sometimes when the environment is not safe, a Jew picks up and moves. So while one does Hafetza wherever one is, if the situation warrants it, I don't see a problem with a person leaving a country that seems to be heading downhill and moving to Eretz Yisrael. My mashpia, whose mashpia was Rav Wolf Greenglass in Montreal, he lived in later years, told me when the current U.S. president was running for office, that is, that he is an anti-Semite and that every Jew should have a ticket and a passport. Okay, one question. Next. I have a son who's in his early 20s and who has been learning in Chabad Mezuzah since high school. I'm a Chabadnik, but my early education included a modern Orthodox day school and Baal Tshuva Yeshiva in my 20s. The script I learned is that while Jews are currently found all over the world, once Mashiach and the Geula are unfolding, Hashem will bring us all back to Eretz Yisrael. And from there, Jews will continue to have a positive effect on the world and will inspire Goyim to serve Hashem. My son, when I mentioned this, says that the center of the world is 770. He says that since Eretz Yisrael will spread out over the entire world, that there will be no need to go to the physical Eretz Yisrael, that he will remain in Brooklyn because Kan Siva Hashem Es Abrachem. Would the Rebbe agree with him, in your opinion? Good. So let me address both questions and the other ones that I mentioned, all hopefully with one general approach, and try to be as specific as possible as well. Well, with all due respect to the writer, this is incorrect. The Frierdiker Rebbe made it very clear he never wanted to leave Russia, and he never would have left Europe either. It comes a point where you're forced to do so. And he said many times, I was forced to leave. As a matter of fact, the Frierdiker Rebbe's entire approach when Rabbonim and others felt that Russia was becoming more anti-Semitic after the revolution and the pogroms, well actually before the revolution, the pogroms that were sweeping Eastern Europe and Russia, many felt the time has come to leave. The Frierdiker Rebbe decided to stay. And when the Bolsheviks came to power after the revolution, we all know the whole story of Yud Beit Tammuz wouldn't have happened if the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia. But as a captain of a ship, felt that it was important to stay there, and he says clearly he only left because he was forced to leave. Literally, they threw him out. Besides the arrest and so on. To the point that he wouldn't leave without the books, and so on. And this is consistent with all the system. The Rebbe himself, this is lesser known by people, but even in the years, the difficult years in the 50s and the 60s, the Rebbe, when asked by Chassidim, should they leave Russia, if the Rebbe said, if you're asking me, as long as there are Jews there, you have to stay there and help them. The Rebbe didn't obviously want to impose that on anyone that felt danger and they had to leave for whatever reason out of danger is one thing. Because the Eibishter runs the world. This happens to be also maybe one of the primary reasons why the Rebbe never went to Eretz Yisrael, why he came to America. This is where God led. But only when God leads you. It was not because suddenly he was frightened for his own welfare and threat. So it's incorrect to say, and this has been the consistent policy of Jews everywhere. This has been the consistent approach of the Rebbe with living in Crown Heights, with not moving from Crown Heights, South Africa, wherever there was some type of situation where there was good reason. Many Jews were taking flight. The Rebbe's approaches, Hashgacha Pratis, you have to stay. And the Rebbe has a whole Sikha that's printed in Likutei Sichos Chelik Vav in the Yisafos that the Rebbe said, Achon Shapesach Tavshin Chavtes, the whole reasons why you're not allowed to move away from a community, a Jewish community. He's talking there about Crown Heights. And he actually quotes also Siman Shin Chavtes, the same Shimon Chavtes in the Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Shabbos that he cites regarding giving up land in Eretz Yisrael. Because there are other Jews living and living in that community, and just because you could leave, you may be put others in danger. And for many other reasons. But above all, the psychological attitude. There's no such thing as giving in. Now, if God insists and demands and pushes people away from a place, like for example, Geder Svard, the Spanish expulsion, that's Milmaila. You know? Like the Rebbe Rashab said, the Frierdiker said, "Nit mit unser Rotzens bin gegangen in Golos." Not with our own will did we go in Golos, and not with our own will we go out of Golos. There's God's will. So we always stand on the front line, and we do not run because of fear. This is a general approach, and therefore the question whether there's a situation where one would flee a Jewish community, well, look, if you have a specific, there's no one but you there, and it's Bekuach Nefesh is Decha Kol HaTeira Kula. But if there's a community of Jews, unlikely that the Rebbe, based on halacha and based on Torah, would allow someone to just leave. Now, if you are being searched for and you're by anti-Semites and they'll arrest you, if you don't, you have Rabbi Rosenblum, one of the first Chassidim that came to the first Chassid that came to America because there was a Mesira on him and he had to leave. That's a specific case, a particular situation where there's a Mesira or there's some other thing. But we're talking about a general approach because the climate has changed. South Africa is another example where there were many, many Jews left. No one wants to say the numbers, but over 50%. And the Rebbe absolutely insisted that both the Chabad should stay and anyone that asked him should stay. This is in general. We're not even talking about Eretz Yisrael. What I said in that episode, and I don't want it to be distorted, when someone asked the Rebbe whether they should make Aliyah, whether they should move to Eretz Yisrael, the main criteria was whether you have a job where you are, that or you are needed in Klei Kodesh, in Askonis, or in something that is helping the Jewish people. If, for example, you're running a community, and you're the rabbi there, people are dependent on you. If you're in business, and you can run a business from Eretz Yisrael, by all means. So, but if you're doing something, you have a particular shlichus that people are dependent on you in any particular area, whether it's chinuch, education, or other things, that's a whole different story. That's what we're talking about. Not to say the Jew's role is to stay in Chutz La'aretz. That's absolutely incorrect. I never said that. That's the case. The Rebbe would not have sent shluchim, and he did that in 1976 and 77 and 78. 3 groups of shluchim to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe, when the Russian Jews started coming out after World War II, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, wherever you are, that's where you should continue your shlichus. Sent many people to Eretz Yisrael. It'd be incorrect to say a job Chutz La'aretz. The Alter Rebbe sent Chassidim to Eretz Yisrael. The Mittler Rebbe for sure. So to say, and above all, the aspiration of Kibbutz Goliath, correct, when Mashiach will come, remains, and many Gedolei Yisrael, at the end of their lives, the Ramban notably, Rosh Hashanah and others, at the end of their lives, they made their way to Eretz Yisrael. Why didn't they try to go when they were younger? The reason is because that was their Makam HaShlichus. They have a community that's dependent on them. They were giving chizuk to the community, they were giving strength, they were teaching. They had a holy shlichus role there. You can't just, that's also part of God's plan. And in Golus, you have to do whatever you can. Till you leave and the whole community, not say the whole community, but part of the community will crumble or be compromised, because spiritually speaking, because if you're leaving, that's a selfish thing to do. It's a tzaddik in pelts. So the goal here, we all know that Yisrael is the place we always daven to. They say the Heli Katzanzer, Chaim of Tzanz, when Jews would travel from Tzanz to Eretz Yisrael, it says that even though he had a limp and he had a hunchback, he would walk them to the edge of town, it says, and tell them, tell every stone and tell every flower and tell every star in Eretz Yisrael that we're on our way. Send them my warmest regards. We're on our way. Obviously, our goal has always been aspiring to, we say it every day, Kibbutz Nidchei Yisrael, and we say it in all different types of tefillas, and the Kibbutz Nidchei Yisrael, Kol Arba Kamfes Ha'aretz, from all 4 corners of the earth. But at the same time, it's about serving God. And let's go back to a principle that I've repeated many times in my life, Chassidus applied. The goal of Torah in general, and Chassidus, is that you are an agent of God's in this world. You're not here just to serve yourself. That is the fundamental criteria about all our decisions, including the decision where you should live, where you should work, and where you should move. It's always driven. If you were born in a particular place, you speak the language, people respect you, you turn into a teacher, a leader, and a mentor, and so on. Not that simple. That God led you there. For you to leave, even for your own personal gain, even if it's spiritual gain, may not be the right kavanah. Because remember, for our comfort zone, the neshama wouldn't come down to earth in the first place. So if we take that attitude, it's not about what you like. Even if you find a raya in the Torah that this is a good thing to do, it's what God wants of you. And one of the ways to follow that is Mashem Etzad Governor, see where God has led you. Don't fight God's plan. Consult if there's a question. Find objective people. And above all, listen to other Rebbe's directives in this regard, and you see a consistent pattern. Again, to find what your shlich is in your place. So my answer to all these questions is that to decide that there's certain anti-Semitism in a country and we're running, I don't see a directive from any of the Rabbeim that's the warrants. If they throw you out and you have no choice, and thank God we're not in such a situation as it was in the Middle Ages, it's another story. That's not up to you. That means that's what God wants, or else He wouldn't let them throw you out. But as long as you're there, you have to run because of fear. We're not driven by fear. We're not driven by Umas Elam. The Eibishter protects the small sheep among the 70 nations. And to start running every time there's fear, you basically could be running the rest of your life, because every country has its ups and downs. There were times South Africa was excellent. Then there was a challenge. It wasn't dafka to Jews. The United States has been excellent. You say one president comes in, he's a little more anti-Semitic, or he has negative attitudes. We're running. That's the general attitude. The time comes when Mashiach comes. The Eibishter wants to take all the Jews, obviously. The fact that the Russian Jews were released from Eretz Yisrael, from Russia, and many of them made their way to Eretz Yisrael, As the Rebbe says, that's definitely a siman of beginning of Kibbutz Goliath. But this is all defined by not our personal choices, defined by God's plan, and obviously the circumstances. Now, at the same time, we find there's shluchim now in Russia. Why doesn't everybody come to Israel? Because the fact is, there are Jews on the ground there that have to be worked with. So, and that answers, I believe, the few questions that were asked here. Regarding the script, what the woman writes about her son. I think it's a woman, I'm not sure, maybe a woman or a man. It seemed to me like a mother. That the center of the world is 770, and it is also a little extreme. If that's the case, the Rebbe would not have sent anybody on shlichus. The Rebbe said the number of times he wants everyone to leave and go on shlichus, wherever that shlichus may be in the world, whether it's in Eretz Yisrael or outside of Eretz Yisrael. So this is going to the other extreme, and the Rebbe is absolutely not agree with him. That's my response, not agree. That could be there's a time he's learning in yeshiva, that's a shlichus to learning in the Rebbe's Daled Amos and learning in the 770 and getting keiches, but then comes a time you get married, and the kavanah is not to stay in 770, not to stay in the Tevis Neach, Tzei min ha-teva, Lech lecha ma'artzecha. This is a common thread that's theme in all the sichos of the Rebbe. And I've heard a story from the name of Berel Baumgarten, Rabbi Berel Baumgarten, who became the Rebbe Shliach in Argentina, a real makusher, and so on, that in the early years the Rebbe sent him on shlichus somewhere. And then it was more sporadic. He would go for there. He would come back. The Rebbe once sent him for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And he said to the Rebbe, okay, he'll go. He'll leave right after Shkia, after Mitzvah Rosh Hashanah. And he'll come back right before Yom Kippur, and he'll leave right away back Mitzvah Yom Kippur to the place of shlichus. So the Rebbe said, no, now my kavanah is you should be there for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So he started complaining or saying to the Rebbe, that's where I get my keiches from the Rebbe's Tkiyah Shefer, from the Rebbe's Yom Kippur. I'll get the keiches. I promised the Rebbe that the first flight after Yom Tov, I'm out. The last flight before Yom Tov, I'm back. Here. The last flight out of there, right before Yom Tov here, I can get back, I'm back. So I'm there all the time except the last minute, the Yom Tov itself. The Rebbe said to him, this is the way I heard it, the Rebbe said to him, was meinst du, was tracht dich unter den Talis bat Tkiyah Shefer? Ich trage wegen den Menschen, was stuppen sich herum mir. Ich trage wegen die Schluchim, was ich geschickt in jenem Ort, in dem Ort, in jenem Ort. Dort bin ich mit sie. So you have to remember, yes, the taiva, Chassidus taiva, it's a kosher one to be around the Rebbe, but that's the whole point, al korchach atachai. The Neshama doesn't want to come down here either. I heard from the late Rab Zalman Posner, beautiful story, when he was a bacher. He, one of the first lichus in the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe sent him was to Chicago. I remember which city it was. Again, it was not a full time to stay there, but he was a bacher, and the Frierdiker Rebbe sensed. He told this to me. I remember Sukkot a few years ago here in New York. He told me we were farbringing. He said the Frierdiker Rebbe sensed that he had some resistance to going. Now, those years the Frierdiker Rebbe was difficult for him to speak due to the stroke. He used his hands a lot. This is how Rab Zalman told it to me. And so he had to watch his hands as well to get the message. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, when a soul has to come down here below. Will sie nicht gehen. She doesn't want to go. Favos. Why? Weil eben is lichtig und warm. Above, it's bright, illuminated, and warm and warm. Und unten, Frierdiker Rebbe pointed, unten, is kalt und finster. It's cold and dark. So why should a neshama, for was will a neshama abgehen von a warme, lichtige Ort zu a kalte, finstere Ort? Why would a soul want to go from an illuminated and bright and warm place to a cold and dark place? Frierdiker Rebbe then took his finger. This is what Rabbi Zalman told me. He took his finger and was slightly trembling. And he said, was tut man? What do we do? What do they do? They say to the neshama, "Du musst herabgehen lamata." Von a Ort was is lichtig und warm, and the Frierdiker Rebbe started moving his finger down like this, trembling as a down, 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 down. So an Ort was a kalt und finster, to a place that's cold and dark. Und dorten darf lichtig machen und warm machen. That's the mission of the neshama. Neshama doesn't want to go, so it has to be told. And the Rebbe's finger down. And Rabbi Zalman told me that many times when life was difficult, financially, emotionally, spiritually, we all have our challenges. He remembers the Frierdiker Rebbe's finger, and he feels traveling with the finger gave him the koyach. I'm going with the Rebbe's finger. Von ha'od was is lichtig und warm, from a place that's bright and warm to a place that's dark and cold. That finger, he says, kept me going, because I'm connected to the Rebbe's finger, going from here to here, and that's the kavanah. That is a generic and general approach of the Rabbeim. Kemuven, there are exceptions. Not every Id and Chassid is zeichet to the chus of that Chassid of the Alter Rebbe that was told to be 20 years of Balagola, and the end of the story to save one Jew. But the attitude is not about our cheshbenis, what's comfortable, what's safe, and so on. They just opened up the new Chabad house after 6 years in Mumbai. With that attitude, after such a terrorist attack, a tragic, unbelievable, Sidus Nefesh Mamish, Kiddush Hashem, two shluch, shliach and a shlucha, leaving his same, and all that. Everyone remembers that tragic day. This is the derech of the Rebbe taught us, that there's no such thing as withdrawing. There's no such thing as retreating. You go in, obviously b'derech hateva, you fortify, you have security, you do what you have to do. But chaz v'sholem, that should be the attitude. So I just wanted to say it very forcefully and very directly in response to all these questions. So we get our keiches from 770. We get our keiches from the center, obviously. But then comes a time when you have to fananderpacken, when you have to take those keiches, take those strings that were given and do what you have to do in the particular place. And if you can't answer this question yourself, find a mashpia. The Rebbe says a mashpia is a necessity. Aseh l'charav. And ask and consult until you get a clarity where your shlichus should be. And that is a case by case. You cannot say a general answer, should this person go to Teretz Yisrael, to go to this place, that. Depends on many factors. It depends on your hashgacha pratis. Depends where God wants you to be. That's the bottom line. That's the goal. And now let's go to Eretz Yisrael itself. And this brings me to what I was going to say about Eretz Yisrael. I think there's a chiddush here that I have not seen at least anywhere. So by the giving out of dollars on the Sunday, Chof Ches of Tov Shenun. So we're talking about 24 years ago. So who came to see the Rebbe? A man called Rani Milo, Israeli. He was Israeli minister of police. He just was appointed to that position. And the Rebbe, they tell the Rebbe who he is, and the Rebbe says in Hebrew that Ibishter should be matzliach, you in your new tafkid, in your new mission. And he says you should not be nispal, lisrashim. You should not be influenced or nispal, affected by what nations of the world, umas goyim zogen, umas elam zogen. You should be fulfilling your tafkid is that you should care about the welfare of the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, Al Pi Teres Yisrael, and Al Pi Eretz Yisrael. In other words, that should be your focus. So then he turns to the Rebbe and says to the Rebbe, in these Yomim Koshim, these difficult days, we need especially the Rebbe's brachas. The Rebbe stops him, as soon as he says Yomim Koshim, these are difficult days. We're about to enter Cheder Shalom, because this is Chav Chesov. And we know the Alter Rebbe, the Bala, he says, the Rabbeinu Hazokan, Bala Tanya, says, this is in Likutei Torah, in Elul, the Rushim of Cheder Shalom, that this time the Melech is Basoda. The king is in the field and giving us and radiating and so on. The Rebbe says, and Befrat Eretz Yisrael, this is the Chiddush. It doesn't say that in Likutei Torah. That the Melech Basoda is even more in Eretz Yisrael, as the Rebbe says, the way I mentioned it a number of times, the Posuk Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Lekecha Eini Hashem Lekecha Bo Mereshes Hashana V'D Achar Hashana. This is the land that the eyes of God, Hashgacha El Yeina, God's providence, is there more from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, more than other places of the world. So that implies that Melech Basada is even more so there. The Rebbe negates the words difficult days. It is difficult in the sense, it's conflicts and the wars and whatever was going on then in Tov Shenun, similar today. But that's the attitude. Yes, there are challenges, but that doesn't mean that the Eibush is not watching, and on the contrary, in Eretz Yisrael, it's even more so. So I thought it was really appropriate to mention this, especially now in Cheder Shalom, Eretz Yisrael. This is the attitude. To go a life of fear, yes, you could always find things to be afraid of. I remember I was a kid here in Crown Heights, when Crown Heights was not in good shape. When there was the big exodus, I was born on St. Mark's, the other side of Eastern Parkway. Then later we moved to Sullivan Place, which many of you maybe don't even know about. Sullivan Place is down, they go down Nostrand Avenue, there's a small little street. Now there's some more Jews moving back there. The Renaissance that we see now, Mamish, the Rebbe's predictions being fulfilled of Crown Heights. So we lived there, and I remember over a summer, coming back after summer camp, the whole block turned from white. All the Jews moved out, and everything had changed completely. We were the only Jews left on the block, literally. So I saw this with my own eyes. So you could say, enough reason to panic. And there was crime, and there were murders, God forbid. And it was a very good reason. They were unfortunately tragic, the terrible, what they call Jewish blockbusters who convince people and help feed the panic by saying, if you don't sell now, the houses will become even cheaper, the prices will fall. It was a panicky time. And the Rebbe stood his ground and made it very clear that no one should leave. Obviously, he didn't leave. So there's a perf dugma chaya. I remember when Giuliani became mayor of New York, he came for the Holotera opening. They expanded the building in the Holotera, and I was the MC. So when I introduced Giuliani, I said to him, "You have to thank the Lubavitcher Rebbe for the revival of New York," because Giuliani, of course, turned the tide around after the pogroms in Crown Heights in '91 in the summer. You have to thank the Rebbe, because the Rebbe said, At Khan, he drew the line. Brownsville fell, East New York fell, Bed-Stuy fell, East Flatbush. And it was very easy, Crown Heights was next, but the Rebbe stood his ground. And he thanked me afterwards and said, absolutely correct. So sometimes it was more than just a Crown Heights thing. The whole New York could have fallen, so to speak. What do you mean fallen? The panic, the emotional. The Rebbe understood the psychology of real estate is about confidence. And the Rebbe always had that confidence, like all the Rabbeim. And that's the derech that we have to take in any time of. This is true with Russia, this is true in South Africa, this is true in Crown Heights, and true in Eretz Yisrael, and true with everything. And Eretz Yisrael even more so because of the Eretz Asher Ein Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereish Shana Ad Achre Shana. Okay. Another follow-up question about non-Jews. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for discussing in depth what our approach should be towards the other nations. Curiously, what do you think about the Jews' current stability? Is it on account that the non-Jewish world is more refined, kind, and evolved? Or are we only saved from the wrath and irrational hatred of the non-Jews because God is simply protecting us? Good. Another follow-up to that. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, the best, clearest, kindest explanation of Jews and non-Jews that I always felt but couldn't express as completely or eloquently. We're all players on the same team, Yasher Koyach. I see so much bigotry and dismissal of Goyim from Erlich Eden in Crown Heights and other places. It has always hurt me and I know it's wrong. Thank you for Mamish keeping me hopeful and connected. Okay. A third question, or third comment if you wish. And that is like this. Disappointed. I enjoyed your lecture, referring to last week's episode. However, I do think that in your need to be a progressive thinker and your interpretation that since the nations of the world will eventually be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, etc., then you made a left turn and decided that somehow Goyim today don't fall into the category of Shalosh Klippos Atmeis, as it says in Tanya. He doesn't write that, but that's what he's referring to. Clearly in Aleinu we say 3 times a day that all humanity will call upon your name and turn all the world's wicked towards you. So the fact that a goy is a goy now has no bearing on the fact that Mashiach will be a game changer for him in the future. After you attempted to elevate the status of a non-Jew contrary to the clear pshat of Tanya, you then went ahead and pushed the status of a Yid down towards the goy to say that what the Tanya says about the self-serving motives of a goy's kindness is not that different than the kindness of most Jews. The English letter you read from the Rebbe about us not falling over ourselves to emulate the goy and to be proud of how we are different hit the mark. They don't come from Kedusha and therefore they don't have Teiv. End of story. The fact that we need to be a light unto them now, or the fact that they will serve Hashem when Mashiach comes, or the fact that they are now getting closer to the new era doesn't change the source of their soul for most goyim, and we don't have to twist the Tanya. While I appreciate your candidness, well, had you really listened to what I had said, you would have looked up the sources. I guarantee you did not look up the sources. I can see from what you're saying. You're speaking your knee-jerk reaction, which is understandable, what you picked up, maybe been programmed, But if you really were open, not to what I have to say, because I'm not here to say my own, so to speak, progressive ideas. What I think you're saying is your own ideas. Why don't you look up the sources, starting from Chaz v'Shalom to say, I was changing the time. The Alter Rebbe says, Chsidu Masa'elim, I'm from Klippas Nega. Now you'll say, why hasn't he mentioned it in Seif Perek Aleph of Tanya? So after last week's episode, I got an email who told me, I wish I could find it settled and I'd read it, but someone told me around Tov Shechov Beis, 1962, the same Rabbi Beryl Baumgarten I mentioned earlier taught Tanya, and he had there some prominent lawyer or someone that was there and had wondered what is the meaning of the end of Perek Aleph. And the Rebbe wrote to him, so he asked many people, they said, you have to learn it the way it is, without pshetlach. And the Rebbe told him, no, you have to tell them that it's absolutely Chsidu Masa'elim do not show Satmeis, that there are exceptions. And the person who wrote to me, that was a big tumult at the time, because the Rebbe basically said, no, you have to learn it differently. Not different with it. Pshat, as I said last week, Chaz v'Shalom to censor what it says there. It's always emes lamite. It'll be emes lamite also la'asid lave, my dear friends. However, you have to also, there's another half of it. But Rabbi Hill says the name of the Alter Rebbe. If you looked up the Likutei Sichos Chelik Yud Gimel, page 230, and I say it again, the page number, just learn it. Learn it with an open mind. The Rebbe is not talking la'asid lave, he's talking about today. If you listen to the Sichos, and many of them I cited here, Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Shemem Aleph, Chof Vav Tov Shemem Vav, even more, and all the hundreds of pages of Sichos in the Mems, Bashem Mishnas Bnei Neach, you'll have a very different attitude. So, and finally, to say it's all, you're pushing it off to the Geula, like as if the Geula is some future event, then the non-Jews may reach that Madrega, is what you're suggesting. To me, that's the biggest distortion of the Rebbe's words possible. And the reason I'm being so tough is because you write like this. I have no problem reading it, but if you're going to dish it out, you have to also take it. We're on the Safuf, we're on the threshold of Geula, which means the world is ready. The world means Umasa'ila, my friend. 7 billion people in the world are mostly non-Jews. It's only 14, 15 million Ken Yirbu of Jews. What it means they're ready? That they're ready for Dasis Hashem Bulvad. They're ready now. Not that they will be. So I believe that this is a very reactionary reaction of a Golus mentality, of thinking maybe as it was 1,000 years ago is true, that when we could not fulfill our obligation in Hilchos Malachim, Seif Perek Ches of the Rambam, to spread Shem Mitzvah B'nei because who we are, and we're Goyim more. And Goyim have become more refined. There's no question about it. It's in the Sichos of the Rebbe. Since I'm throwing Sichos in, I'll throw a few more in. And the next one I throw in is the Sicha of B'Shalach Tov Shin Mem. I'm not even going to quote it now. Look it up yourselves, and you'll be surprised at what you find there. And many, many, many more of the Sichos of the Rebbe, of where we are, where we stand. And of course, maybe Elul Kolona, Vayeshev Nun Beis, where the Rebbe said clearly about the refinement of the Umas Elim, including Tzarfaz, that the Alter Rebbe was so against, that today we are at the state of refining the world. Does this mean that every Goy is a lover of Jews? There's no anti-Semitism? No. Also, anti-Semitism could be cultural, it could be habitual. Lav Dafke, it's always a Molech version. There are many levels of it. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't lock our doors, and I'm not suggesting we don't fight defensive wars and we do whatever it takes to protect ourselves. But there's a whole attitude that I would say, yes, is progressive, but not progressive in the derogatory way you suggested. Progressive because the Rebbe is thinking about the Geula, and that's progressive. It means thinking ahead, progress. Not Chaz v'Shalom changing one iota of Torah. It's understanding that the world is changing, more refined. And that brings me to the first question. I believe God protects the Jewish people. We do not wait for Chesed Umum Chatas to rely on the Chesed of non-Jews. But it's not a contradiction to say that the non-Jewish world has become more godly, has become more refined, has become more, as the Rambam writes in the section that was censored, is preparing the world for Geula. What's the contradiction? The same God that's protecting the Jewish people from everyone, and it's a soul that needs a special bracha, we don't need anybody's protection from the world, has also, with time and the mitzvahs and the millions and billions of mitzvahs that have refined the world, Umas Elim have also become more refined. We all know the Medrash says that if the nations of the world knew what the Beis HaMikdash does to protect them, they would surround it with legions of armies and make sure the Beis HaMikdash should not be touched. It will be the Beis Yizu, be Beis Tefillah, the Kol HaAmin. It will be a house of prayer for all. So, consciously or unconsciously, Mazlaya Chazi, non-Jews are coming to that point. We bring the 70 Karbonos Sukkos. For what reason? Keneged the Ayin Umis. On and on and on. And just go back to the Sichos. I've spoken a lot about it. And I have no problem agreeing to disagree, but bring sources. That's the key. And look up the sources I'm suggesting, and I believe that will be a different understanding. I want to just bring through two things back into the picture. I mentioned Noya Chelik Tezvov about Akum Sheshavas. Very, very clear. Not bringing Eden down to the level of Goyim. Punkt Faket. The world is always being more refined. Goyim have become more refined. The ultimate of Goyim is Mamala Kalalmin, as I discussed, Elikim, right? And Eden, Adarab, they also have elements that they have in common with non-Jews as far as living in this material world. We have bodies, like he says in Tanya, because Nidbe, Begube Chumri Yusum, Begufam, like Gufe Umisa Elam. And there are many things that are in common, but the Eden get lifted even higher. When the Eden are not just Mamala Kalalmin, also Sevav Kalalmin, and even higher. And the Sikha, that was one Sikha I brought, the Sikha as well of Bolok, printed in Chelik Chav Gimel, Charcher B'nei Sheis, about that they will not die, L'asad Lave, and many, many more. One more I did not mention, it's in the middle of the Mems, the Rebbe discussed it, and that is the Sikha about the Rebbe speaking in the Rambam. If someone can send me a note, an email, and if they know the exact Sikha, I believe it was Mem Hey maybe, Mem Hey, Mem Vov, maybe Mem Dal, probably Mem Hey. The Rebbe speaking in the Rambam in Hilchis Ribis. So we know there's an issue, you're not allowed to lend money, to borrow money to someone with ribis. Ribis is interest. When it comes to a non-Jew, there's a mitzvah to borrow with interest. The Rebbe asked a klotz kasha, what's wrong with ribis? People always ask, it seems like a discrimination against non-Jews. If it's not fair, it shouldn't be not fair for everyone. And there's even halachas, mepnei hashalom, you do things simply to keep the peace with the non-Jewish world. So the Rebbe went, in his usual inimitable style, turned the whole thing on its head. What's wrong with borrowing money with on interest? If someone sells you, for example, a pair of shoes, they bought it for $10, and you buy it, sell it for $12. That's the whole point of business. Zovin, Tagri. If you make the same amount that you bought it for, you're not making any profit. You can't be mafarnes your family that way. So if you have cash, which has value, what's wrong with selling cash? You're selling $100 for $110. Why is it different than selling a commodity, an object? And the Rebbe's answer is a pashta answer. He says, because achicha steht in pasuk, that you shouldn't be malva beribus to achicha, he's your brother. And your brother you have to treat more than just logically. That's why when it comes to non-Jews, like the Rebbe Sikha Noya Chelik Tezvov, there's the Seder HaElam. What's wrong with ribis? Mam is turning over a whole halacha that people think shows that the Goyim are tough and inferior. No. You live with the expectations of Mamala Kalam, Elam Kimino, the Elam Ateva, Darki Ateva, Masa Matam Bamuna, and there's nothing wrong with ribis. We're not talking about exorbitant interest, we're talking about a decent and competitive interest, etc. When it comes to achicha, the Torah expects more, and that becomes a mitzvah. Al derech lifnim mishur adin, but in this case it's a din. And on, many more sikhs of this nature. Okay, we move on to the next subject. The next subject is, I want to just, since I have to go back because I remember I didn't spell it out. Is Israel still the safest place on earth? Absolutely. As I said from the Rebbe, it's not even a shayla. The Rebbe gave a milsa b'taima. And as I said, the whole attitude of the Rebbe, though I answered the question, I just felt it's important to spell out. I answered the question, are we being too progressive when it comes to non-Jews? Yeah, the Rebbe is being progressive, if you want to call the Rebbe progressive because the Gul is closer and the world has been more refined, call it that. Progressive, if you mean in a negative derogatory, absolutely not. This is Torah. By Matan Torah, the Goyim did not want, Bnei Yishmael and Bnei Esav rejected the Torah for their reasons. And today, and ultimately, as the Zohar says, they will accept it. That's called Shev Mitzvah B'nei, especially in preparation to the time of Gula. The next question, which is a completely different topic, making it financially and tuition costs. Okay. I read a number of questions a few weeks ago. I believe it was episode 3 weeks ago. It would be episode 29. And I discussed it briefly at the end of the episode, and I said I would discuss it some more. I want to read a few questions, those that I did not read. But the ultimate question is obviously the issue of the rise of tuition costs to the point that it's prohibitive for some people, and they're forcing them. Some people feel they're being forced to compromise their children's education. And this question spills over also where I should live. What's more important, to have a comfortable life or to give chinuch to our children that's prohibitive? Question, obviously, there may be other options. And I want to address that. So I'm just going to read a few questions and then we'll talk about some more. Yeah. I really appreciate the school's financial position. To be able to pay quality teachers on time and maintain a proper staff takes a huge amount of funds, besides for building expenses, etc. Still, there should be some type of trust fund that subsidizes tuitions for the families so that parents can still pay their rent and put some food on the table. We cannot afford to look the other way. The situation has reached a state of crisis, and I would rather not spell out the far-reaching effects of this tuition dilemma. Anybody who truly wants to invest in the well-being of the Jewish people should invest in Jewish education. There will be more Jews and a lot more educated Jews. And to the families struggling with tuition, this writer writes, the present tense seems like an eternity, but God forbid should the financial burden of tuition be in any way affect family decisions. God forbid should the financial burden of tuition in any way affect family decisions. At the end of the day, when the education phase is behind you, you'll be very happy that you had many beautiful children that you could and gave them the very best education. But then, of course, the question is, how do we deal with the struggle? Next question in this same family. Today in our Jewish world, we see great wealth and tremendous poverty. Some of the wealth was not gained in the most meritorious of ways. Yet we don't have the leadership among our own to structure the frum community in the most economically feasible way. People are upset about over-top tuition obligations and are wary of the future that someday their children or grandchildren will be forced to attend public school. There's also the concern about government cutbacks on services that are crucial to the frum community. The Rebbe advocated the avoidance of secular subjects in college, but today's job market has little room for the uneducated, and Klei Kodesh jobs are drying up as well. People are torn between following the Rebbe's directives and doing what needs to be done to gain employment. Then there's also increasing resentment outside of the world of a community that has a large representation in the welfare, food stamp, Medicaid sector. Means there's resentment outside of the community for the religious community, of the religious community. While the percentage in America on the whole, on the dole, that is frum is minuscule, the percentage of frum within the frum world who are on the dole is enormous. I cringe when I see news reports about frum people caught up in shady business dealings. What are the answers for us as a community? Okay. And then there's similar questions about, should I compromise the education of my children due to financial stress? How much financial stress should we bear, etc., etc. Hashgacha Pratis would have it. Just last week, there was publicized a letter from the Rebbe addressing this. A letter dated 29th of Tammuz, Tov Lamed Zayin, to someone in Silver Springs, Maryland. So I just want to read the letter. The letter was publicized by Rabbi Shomber Shapiro from the archive of Rabbi Nissim Mendel. I'm not sure if this letter was signed or not. It doesn't indicate it. I'm assuming it was, but even if not, which means that maybe it was written and the Rebbe did not edit it and did not sign it, it's still most likely a first draft, if that's the case. But I just want to be, for the record, I like to be accurate. So, at worst, it's a hanocha bilti mugeh. At best, it was a signed letter and sent out and all that. This is to acknowledge receipt of your comments on the thought of the week on the subject of Torah study, wherein you take exception to the story of Hillel and the doorkeeper of the Beis HaMedrash, as related by our sages and cited in the said thought. The famous story where Hillel was not allowed into the Beis HaMedrash because he didn't have money. So he went up on the roof to hear the Torah. The snow started falling to the point where the snow was covering up, and he was so engaged with the study that he didn't notice. Then the people below started realizing there's a shadow. They saw the room getting dark. There was no electricity in those days. They saw the shadow of a man on the roof, because there was the light used to come in from there, from like a light roof, and they realized they saved his life. Could have been frozen to death. So this fellow is taking issue with the idea. Usually the lesson is Hillel's, like the Rebbe will write in a moment, Hillel's dedication to learn with such commitment to the point he put himself at risk. But here he's pointing out, how could you deprive someone from learning Torah? And look, you almost allowed him to die from it. So the Rebbe says, needless to say, that's his issue. Why would the doorkeeper not let him in? In other words, essentially a high tuition costs relative to Hillel's poverty. Needless to say, in relating the story and including it in the Torah, meaning teaching instruction, the sages did not intend to focus on the doorkeeper's conduct with a view to condemn him. The real purpose of the story is to bring out a two-pronged lesson, both for those who are in the category of the doorkeeper and those who are in the category of seeking admission to the house of learning, as pointed out in the said thought. First of all, there are several points in the story which you have apparently overlooked. It should be self-evident that the doorkeeper had no idea that his refusing to admit Hillel resulted in any danger to him, Hillel. It should also be self-evident that the charge of a relatively small fee for admission was necessitated by the need to defray the costs of maintaining the school. It only reflects the general state of poverty of Jewish communities in those days, which could not afford to provide free tuition to advanced students. This can also be seen from the poor economic situation of Hillel himself. Okay. It may be assumed that had Hillel sought assistance or intervention, he could have gained admission without imperiling his life. But in view of his character and extraordinary humility, as related in various places in the Talmud, and as indicated in this episode itself, it was out of the question for him to accept a charity or any special favor. He would only use his own hard-earned money for admission, and even if he could be admitted free by way of a special scholarship, as is now called, it would be at public expense, which would not be acceptable to him, to Hillel. A further mitigating circumstance is the fact that, insofar as the doorkeeper is concerned, Hillel had been paying the admission fee daily, prior to the incident. Undoubtedly, the doorkeeper did not know that Hillel was paying for it with a half of his daily earnings, for true to his character, Hillel would surely not have boasted about it. It is therefore reasonable to assume that Hillel was well able to pay for his admission, but for some reason did not want to pay for it on that particular day. Now for the lessons of the story. Insofar as those who are in the category of the doorkeeper, those in charge of admission to a yeshiva or similar institution, they should bear in mind that Torah study is a matter of life for a Jewish boy and girl, and should seek every possible means to make it available to each and every Jewish boy and girl. Even if there may be a doubt that a particular applicant might be trying to evade paying for tuition, no child should be turned away. Nor should any applicant be made to feel embarrassed in any case of hardship. Unfortunately, these principles have not always been fully observed in admissions to some day schools and Torah institutions in the present time. Very clear directive. That's why I'm reading the entire letter better than anything I could say. The Rebbe's eigene Werte. And for those who are in the category of seeking admission to Torah learning, the Rebbe continues, the lesson is that no sacrifice should be too great when it comes to Torah study. Even those who have been learning Torah every day, and as a question of missing just one day, as in the case of Hillel, the same sacrifice should be made not to miss even a single day of Torah study. There is surely no need to elaborate further on the above. To conclude on a more personal note, seeing your interest in Torah study, as is evident from your annotations, I am confident that you realize its underlying principle, which is, as our sages define it, learning for the purpose of practicing. For the essential thing is the deed, namely the fulfillment of the mitzvahs in the daily life and conduct. This includes, of course, the mitzvah of Ahavta L'Recha Kamecha, the great principle of our Torah, which makes it the duty and privilege of every Jew to work for the dissemination of the Torah and mitzvahs to the utmost of one's ability, both by words coming from the heart and even more effectively by showing a living example. The words speak for themselves. It does not seem like there's an exception to this, because it's, again, a milsa b'taima, a very clear reason regarding high tuition costs, and this is a lesson to all the schools that we have. The fact that we do need to pay expenses, absolutely. So there are different ways this can be done, either bigger fundraising campaigns, scholarships, and so on. But the Rebbe makes it very clear, and I repeat it again, that those in charge of admission, the doorkeepers, in the case of the Hillel, Torah study is a matter of life, meaning life and death for every Jewish boy and girl, and they have to seek every possible means to make it available to each and every Jewish boy and girl. Even if there's a doubt that someone may be evading tuition, no children should be turned away, nor should anyone be made to feel embarrassed. Okay. Last time I discussed this, I said we have to put our heads together. This letter, Ashgacha Pratis, just was publicized recently. So it tells you clear directive. We have to put our heads together and make sure to fulfill this directive. Now's not the time to discuss the analysis of the Rebbe, the story of Hillel with the doorkeeper then, what he knew, what he didn't know. The Rebbe pretty much elaborates on it. But here you have the answer. Now, from the point of view of parents, we cannot compromise the education of our children, no matter what. But that's not an excuse for people to take advantage from the point of view of the doorkeepers, the ones that are running the schools, as the Rebbe says very clearly here. And what we have to figure out is a solution. But until there's an actual solution, the Zaira stands. For any mechanech, anyone running a Meisat Chinuch, to defy the Rebbe's Zaira is undermining and going against the Rebbe's directive. So as a chassid or as a shliach, you have a clear directive how our attitude should be to chinuch. Even the Rebbe says, even if you have suspicion that someone may be evading, you have to figure out a way to do it. The child cannot be deprived because of it. As I said, we put our heads together and our kavanah is what the Rebbe wants. There's no question that we can come with an answer. You see it time and again. I also was told, and again, I'd love to have the help of the audience here. If anybody knows Sichas where the Rebbe speaks about this, I did not have a chance to research it fully in the Rebbe's Sichas. Someone tells me in Lamed Hey or Lamed Vov, around Pesach, after Pesach, where the Rebbe would often speak about education, because it was the summer season coming up. In general, the Rebbe spoke about chinuch in that period in time. Also Simchas Torah very often about chinuch. If anyone can point out, I was told that the Rebbe said then, I don't remember now, I remember it vaguely, that the Rebbe said that every school should have at least 10% of tuition should be covered by scholarships. I have to see the context, but if anyone has more information, please pass it on to me. I'll definitely share it. And if there's other sichas as well, or letters. But this letter speaks for itself, and I think it covers a good part of the discussion on this topic. Again, if more questions come up on this, more information, I will definitely share. Let's move on to the question of alternative medicine. Thank you for discussing the issue of fraudulent doctors in episode 28. I have a follow-up question about medicine in general and alternative methods. What defines a doctor? Which, if any, alternative medicine is legitimate? What happens if there's a disagreement between an MD and an alternative healer? Another question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I was brought up in a family that was always suspicious of doctors and Western medicine. Therefore, I am more inclined to seek out alternative approaches to treating any family. Naturopaths, homeopathy, and healers of all sorts. I often speak with spiritual healers too, and often can identify the roots of health and psychological issues, providing ruchnius-based medicine, i.e., fixing a mezuzah, removing an ayin hara. My friends and husband's family think it is a big hoax, but it's really important to me. Some have even accused me of practicing witchcraft, chaz v'shalom. Is what I am doing permitted? And do you have any words of guidance to ward off negativity from my critics and family? I have already stopped discussing any of these matters in front of them. Thanks. Okay, so let's begin with the Torah approach and many letters of the Rebbe. This does border on asking a shaila to a Rav, because not all these matters are in the domain of this forum of my life, Chassidus applied. Many things are about addressing it from a point of view of halacha. So the Torah says, "V'rapa yirapele," that nitn reshus l'reifel arapis. The Torah gave permission for a healer to heal. The question is, what means a healer? So we have in Shulchan Aruch. We have in Shulchan Aruch in Yeda Deya, Siman Shin Lamed Vov. You look in Alter Rebbe, in the regular Shulchan Aruch, Shulchan Aruch, Eirach Chaim, Tofresh Yud Ches. Those are the laws of Yom Kippur. And you have clearly the definition of a doctor. Definition of a doctor is someone who's a mumcha, an expert. And generally, it says clearly in the Sfarim, in Halacha, an expert means that the Mamshala recognizes them as an expert, the government. You'll say suddenly the government's an expert. That's part of the establishing. Some Rabbanim Paskin, it also includes that they're peers, a medical guild, or any type of a medical association, and so on, that recognize. Because that's exactly what the Torah is doing. It's trusting the human effort in study of medicine. But how do you decide? So you have to have some consensus. It may not be perfect, but medicine is defined by a doctor that has the credentials. Yes, is it possible that a man with the credentials can be worse doctor than someone without credentials? But the Torah, that's what the Torah recognizes. And that's what the Torah gives kayach to. Now, in Aruch HaShulchan, and I believe it's in Siman Shin Lamed Vov, yeah. He says, He says those words, that idna today tzarich liyas musmach ma'amemshala. And if somebody intervenes who does not have those credentials, it's a matter of shvichus damim. It's a matter of pikuach nefesh. So if you have to choose between an alternative and an MD, and it's exclusive, mutually exclusive, not an MD that also knows alternative, from a Torah point of view, you have to usually follow the MD. I say usually because I don't want to paskin things on this forum, go to Arov, but just to get the discussion going, it appears that in most cases, and maybe in all cases, you have to follow those type of doctors. The Rebbe has in many letters that families should not intervene in medical situations because families are subjective, they get hysterical, they can be panicky, they can be emotional, etc., etc., and for many other reasons. And that's the direction. Now, what about alternative medicine that MDs, doctors do approve of? By all means. What about alternative medicine that they don't disagree with but they don't approve of? That has to be done case by case, and you have to find the trustworthy people. And it's not a black and white thing. I will refer you to a whole series of letters where the Rebbe talks about it, and Igros Kodesh, that I want to thank a few people who passed that on to me. And I'm just referring to a few of the Igros Kodesh. So this is something you can learn. Igros Kodesh, I don't have the volumes. I have the numbers of the letters themselves. The letters, even though there's volumes and page numbers, here I have before me only the number of the letter. So this is Yud Zayin Ir, the letter Tafshin Yud. It's Igeres number Tafresh Hey. That's 605. Igeres number 606. Igeres number 734. That's Tezayin El Tafshin Yud. All this is how the Rebbe speaks about going to doctors and listening to them, including sometimes also alternative methods that the Rebbe approves and sometimes doesn't approve of. We have the Geras number 628. That's all Yuta Sivan Tafshin Yud. These are all the year Tafshin Yud. So that would be, maybe it's volume 4. I'm not positive, Tafshin Yud, what volume that is, 4 and 5 could be. We have letter 660, Tafrei Samach. We have letter number 1362, Aleph Shin Samach Beis. That's a letter from Chozayin Tevis Tafshin Yud Beis. And we have letter, that's a long letter about this. Then we have, continue on, letter number 1619, Aleph Tafresh Yutes. That's on Gimel Sivan Tafshin Yud Beis. Aleph Tafresh Lamed Gimel, 1633, Yud Beis Sivan Tafshin Yud Beis. Just to read from that letter, because that, the Rebbe says, V'hainu delishel das reifu lamalis achrei hoira osei, to ask the opinion of a doctor and follow his directions. Aval hafakochkeit in them, v'apilpul v'ashak v'tarya, b'deis harefim, but the fakochen, to start getting yourself consumed with, and immersion, in pilpul, and back and forth, in the opinions of doctors, v'amoke b'chochmes harafu v'nyonah, and immersion in the whole study of medicine and school of medicine. That's not your inyan. It's not your job. That's the job of those whose parnassus from there. That's one of many letters where the Rebbe says that type of point. There's of course the Rebbe's hera about, if you can go to one doctor and get his opinion. Go to a second doctor. If they disagree, you go to a third doctor. And this again includes alternative medicine too. So letter number 8, Aleph Tafshin Lamed Zayin, 1737. That's Chav Dalet Tammuz Tafshin Yud Beis. Aleph Tafshin Lamed Ches. The next letter, 1738. Chav Zayin Tammuz Tafshin Yud Beis. Letter 2140, Beis Kuf Mem. That's Chav Aleph Sivan Tafshin Yud Gimel. Beis Reish Pei Beis, 2282 and 2283. Those are both from Gimel Kislev Tafshin Yud Daled letters. 2903, 2903, Beis Taf Taf Kuf Gimel, from Gimel El Tafshin Yudalad. And with that is just one selection of letters. Since this is all on video, you could always go back and, if you missed what I said, and just listen and look up these letters. Each letter has a different component, but they all lead toward the same piece of idea, that we have doctors that are experts. Experts are defined by what I said earlier. Alternative medicine should be done under the guidance of a doctor, And if you find yourself a doctor that happens to like alternative medicine, by all means, but not just we do whatever we want, whatever you like, whatever your inclination. Regarding yourself, the person who's writing that he himself is practicing, you have to find a Rav, you have to find doctors who give you an approval, because you're negei b'davar, and you may not be doing something right, even though your intentions may be good. I cannot judge it because I can't say it's wrong either. You have to really have behind you experts who approve and agree, and not to be a maverick of your own. You're dealing with life and death. You're dealing with halachas. Halachas says clearly when a doctor is capable, you have to listen to a doctor. And even if you think you can't override a doctor, because a doctor is the one that the Torah entrusted with life and death. I mentioned some of the dinim in Shulchan Aruch. You can look it up yourself. There's also Shin Lamed Vav, again I repeat, because there are interesting lines there about what a doctor is defined as. So that covers alternative medicine. What have we not covered? Well, we'll have to continue on the next discussion, the topics that I have not been able to cover because we have run out of time. I wanted to conclude where I began, since it's Chodesh Elul, Chodesh Harachamim, Ani l'deidi v'deidi li. I am to my beloved is to me. A month of Melech Basada, especially in Eretz Yisrael. So may this be a month of Rachamim. The Eibishter should open up all his channels of Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, which is the 13 secret attributes of mercy and compassion that the Eibishter Hashem revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai when he was begging and praying for forgiveness for the Jewish people. It's amazing. It took 40 days for Moshe to receive the Torah, law, but 80 days to get forgiveness. And the story essentially of this month, and the story really that begins all the way from Mitzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah and leads all the way through Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, is the story of love, betrayal, and reconciliation. Who of us does not have that challenge in life? There are things that we achieved, then there's been a betrayal, we betrayed ourselves, we may have wandered away from what were our kavanah, what our purpose is. Everybody has the height of when they reach our madrege. Yotzias Mitzrayim, you became a free person. God took you out of your mitzarim v'gvulim. Then you received Torah, even greater gili, mandate. 50 days later, the Eibishter gave the Torah, our mandate, our bar mitzvah. And then we all lose our innocence at some point, as sad as it sounds. The states of existential loneliness or other situations where we build our golden calf. You start worshipping something that is not pure Torah. Aveda zara loy, something that's strange to you. Everyone in their own way, bedakos. We lose our innocence a bit. No person, every person who doesn't have Aveda is a moment of insanity. We lose sight of the destination. We lose sight of the objective. Everyone has their Cheta Egel stage in their own little way. Sometimes it's Egel Kipshut, Egel Hazov, gold, silver, money. Sometimes it's Kovet, Taiva. All these things are forces that bring us down. Then you think, okay, now what? Comes Moshe Rabbeinu, marches up to heaven, does not take no for an answer. 80 days, 40 days, the Eibishter refuses. In Chodesh Elul, he begins to open up. Melech Basada, the Eibishter begins to radiate and reveal the secret of what? Not the secret of how to live a perfect life. The secret how to find forgiveness and how to repair something that was broken. It's far, far greater. To be able to go into a place where there was a setback, there was a fall, there was an egel, hazov, and to learn after that to reconnect. That brings us to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, ultimately Yom Kippur, the day of the birth of hope. Moshe comes down with the mountain, glowing, with his second luchas, salachti kidvarecha, as we will say 3 times after Kol Nidre, that he prevailed. The greatest moment in history. A man, a human being of flesh and blood, was able to prevail over God, that God should give us a tool, the tool of hope, forgiveness, that even in the darkest situation, you can always find hope. That is a most empowering lesson, which really drives me and my work, drives, I believe, should drive each of us. And very much as the driving force behind this, my life Chassidus applied, is to take Chassidus, the Torah, the Chassidus Nefesh, the heart and soul, tears, blood, sweat, and tears that the Rabbi poured out, up to our own Rebbe, Der Ashvi, Rebbe, pouring out for what? For us to apply it to our lives. No matter where you are in your life, there's always a way to rebuild. That's the message, and that's what Elul is so powerful. It's 30 days where we're given 30 days to go to a situation, no matter what happened, you can open up a door. There's no such thing as impossible. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu opened up. That's what the Rebbe opened up for us. And that's why we, even though 20 years after Gimel Tammuz, we have to do whatever we can for ourselves and for our families and everyone we know to take Chassidus and make it come alive. The time is now. When? How much more do we have to wait? What can you do about the Geula? That's what we do. That will bring Osimar da Malka Mashiach. And the more we can do it with passion and relevance and bring it down to real life, the more power it has. I'm just learning an Ayin Beis, and I want to conclude with a line from unbelievable line of Chassidus, Perek Reish Samach Zayin, 267. And the Rebbe Rashab writes, Kol echad v'echad, the shtadl has to be mishtadl, as kama she'efsheri, how much possible, to bring down concepts of Chassidus, even concepts that are completely beyond us, be'efen shel riyah, that we should find it some way that we should visualize it. We should be able to envision it in our own personal lives. And he goes on in a fascinating way in that chapter to explain Yichud Elah, which he says is only shaykh to neshamas geveios, to the highest souls. That too, he gives a mashal. He gives a mashal from Achshav Dibur for each of us to be able to somewhat visualize. At kama she'efshir. That is the message, that we can take Chassidus and apply it to our lives. Even the highest levels, lifnei some things that are beyond Yichud Elah. But at kama she'efshir, as much as possible, each of us can find a way to apply it to ourselves, to our children. And when you can visualize something in your life, that already makes it a reality. This has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 32. Until next week, Sunday, 8 to 9, everyone should have a very Elul Dika, Chidush HaRachamim week, Melech B'Sadeh week, and do whatever we can to fulfill the Rebbe's Heiros, Chassidus Heiros, how to use this month, a month that there's this opening, to be able to visualize, to be able to see the Melech, and ask everything we want, and the Melech will give it to us, B'Sever Ponim Yofis. Thank you very much.